Last review we delved into Harvestella, a surprising decent game and one I recommended. The surprising part came mostly from the fact that I knew nothing going into it, which is a recurring thing I do for reviews from time to time. Mainly because I love stepping into games with little information as possible, cause you never know what you will find in that case. Maybe something good, maybe it's something unexpected, maybe it's an absolute gem, or maybe something bad. Or worse. Or maybe I'm just suffering of a weird gambling addiction via video games. We just don't know it. Again, this gamble worked for Harvestella pretty well, and as experts say, once you are on a winning streak you should never stop. So we will continue the streak by diving into Romancing Saga 2: Revenge of the Seven, a remake of a game with a similar name released in 1993. In other words, this can be considered to be an actual remake, and a remake of such an old game is just fascinating to me, as things used to be a bit different back then, be that in story, gameplay, and overall design focus. So yeah, excited to dive in, and of course I will tell you all about it in this review. Long ago, there were 7 heroes whom protected and saved the world by defeating numerous monsters and enemies. However, at some point these 7 heroes disappeared without warning, and it's said that once the world falls into chaos again, they will return. And after many years of peace, the world did fall into chaos again, and as the prophecy foretold, the heroes return. But not in the way that they were expected, as in their absence they became monsters, corrupted demons, and they had an army full of demons threatening the entire world to its foundation. In this dire hour, the Emperor of the Avalon Kingdom set out to face one of these demons, but he and his firstborn son unfortunately did not survive this encounter. The throne now falls on to us, the player, to take on the role of the new Emperor of the Kingdom of Avalon and fight back these so-called legendary heroes, uncovering the reason why they became these abominations and ultimately lead this world into the next era of peace. In other words, the story of Romancing Saga 2 is a common ruler's quest, and the story itself is nothing special to rhyme home about if it wasn't for one simple aspect. Forming alliances, developing a kingdom and fighting evil takes a lot of time, and instead of having the conflict be resolved in what seems to be mere days or weeks, we get the story told over generations of emperors. Whenever an emperor dies, his or her memory, skill and overall legacy is transferred to the newest emperor. This process is repeated throughout the entire game, as by age or combat the emperor will die and a new one has to be picked. Each emperor you pick can be a different class, meaning the new emperor will develop skills or take on completely different roles than the previous one. With this progression of the royal bloodline, the world itself of course develops as well, which I found to be the most interesting aspect of this entire time skip / new generation idea presented here. This aspect gives huge opportunity for personalized stories. Like, one emperor defeated 2 of the 7 heroes in its lifetime, basically becoming a legend in the kingdom, while another creates a lot of bonds with other factions, and there always will be one emperor that's basically a failure and did barely anything in its rule, or died in battle to a very, very weak opponent. Yet even that can serve for a great vengeance story for the next emperor. This rebirth / swapping emperor mechanic just piqued my interest right at the start, and I was instantly on board with it. Because where in games death of a character should be considered a problem or a bad thing, it here feels like another path of possibilities opened up, be that in terms of combat or personal story, and to a degree even the world itself, as investments and actions done by one emperor translates in progress later down the line, which is just very exciting and fun. And if it reaches half of that potential that we have here on the table, it's huge. But unfortunately, that halfway, let alone its fullest potential, is not reached. Yes, the idea and aspect is there, and again, it's exciting and it has impact. But the development of the world, the exploration it offers, and the story connection made are very selective and stay more linear than they had to be. For example, at some point a location was a fortress that you had to infiltrate and beat the enemy out of. And once that mission is done, the fortress is abandoned. But over time this place is developed to a small town and at later stages asks you to invest in developing a bridge to improve the town even further. Which by itself sparked a completely different side quest altogether. And that's how you do side quests. This is awesome. But besides this one location, barely any other location in the world gets the same treatment. There are a lot of other side quests in this game which stimulate exploration and involvement with the world and its people in a fairly good way, making the world feel very vast and open and interesting. But they are nothing like this interconnected questline of my example, and the lack of these types of quest lines leave a huge void and overshadow the other side quests altogether. In my opinion, more of these deeper side quests should have been in the game, and honestly, coming up with them isn't that hard. Just like with the main story, you can pull clichés out of the book without shame. Like mountain villages could get better road connections, or some towns could be struggling financially, while others could suffer of a political problem like corruption. It's overall great that I play as many emperors in this game. But in the end it's only by name, not in the sense of the problems they face, the larger stories they are a part of, or the impact they have on the world itself. Even the emperor swapping, while being a cool idea, felt slowly becoming more shallow the further I got in my playthrough. Whenever you switch between emperors, its impact is mostly felt in the combat, not in the story, world, or even interactions. There is no penalty in dying, nor is there any backlash in the kingdom or the world to overcome after this loss. Heck, for certain quests, it's a must to swap emperors to a specific class, which for me took away a lot of the meaning whenever I swapped to a new emperor. Instead of picking between classes I hadn't tried yet, or with some bad RNG had to make the best out of the classes I was given for my next emperor, I could just repick the next emperor whenever I liked. And while the simple repick option is a one-time use, I could also just go into the wild, die on purpose, and then get to choose from potentially better classes with no repercussions or penalties. Now, from a gameplay perspective, this makes total sense. I get that. But from any other point of view, it's not in balance with how the story presents this, and it takes away too much value and meaning of having a choice like this. Again, in the end it felt more like this swapping was there to impact the combat and add its strength there. And thankfully did. It did really well. As a remake, Romancing Saga 2 Revenge of the Seven completely surprised me, as while the game looks and feels very modern, the combat is very traditional turn-based JRPG. And I loved it. It's very layered, lots of side aspects, a lot of tactical and customization options. It can and will be very rough on you at times, and its very presence in the game is everywhere in everything you do. Each combat encounter is instant-based, where your party faces off against certain monsters. Each monster has their own weaknesses, which goes from weapons to elemental types. Party members will gain experience after each combat encounter and will increase not just their HP or skill points, but also efficiency with their used weapons or elements in said encounter. Even unlock new skills when repeatedly using certain abilities. In rare cases, even unlock abilities to become completely immune to certain attacks of enemies. Of course, gear plays a huge role as well, but also formation, as the right formation can complement your party picks in the best way possible. But it's party management and creation that has the biggest influence here on the combat. There are a total of 30 unlockable classes, each with their own pros and cons, which translates to abilities, efficiency with certain weapons, developed skills, and so on. Setting up your party is probably the most interesting, because after every emperor switch, you gotta construct a new party on the foundation of your last emperor's party. Now, what makes it so interesting is that whenever an emperor switches, you basically switch class. Yes, you can pick the good old faithful party again and again, but that does not mean that your new emperor and therefore their new class will suit the old party very well. And that is not just an interesting aspect, but also just a clever way of the game to keep the combat interesting for longer periods of time. Because the combat is what you do mostly in the game. Now, if you really want to, the game does offer you enough options and customization that you can somewhat keep the main party you create at the start together until the very end. And of course you can swap emperors as much as you want, again undermining the idea of the mechanic altogether. But let's be honest, that does not sound like a lot of fun, especially considering that doing good in combat without these exploits feels highly rewarding. As stated before, the combat can be very rough, especially after the Emperor swap. The difficulty just ramps up while your party needs to find its footing again with the new formation and members. Sometimes a normal encounter can push a party member to half of its life points, or worse, can bring the entire party to an end because a debuff spiraled out of control and you did not learn how to deal with that yet. But when you know the enemy's weaknesses, possible attacks, and have properly built party members and make the right tactical calls, each encounter flies by in seconds, wiping the floor with anything and everything as you just watch and enjoy the feeling that everything is done right. And that is just so good, and that is just on the normal difficulty. If you want to be challenged even further, this game got you covered. Overall, Romancing Saga 2 Revenge of the Seven is a pretty good game. Its story is straightforward and nothing special about, but the side quests create some great stories, and with how the Emperor swapping works and the way the world develops at the same time, truly brings this game to life at times. However, on this aspect, the game leaves a lot of potential on the table, especially how each Emperor could form a personalized hero in your own playthrough/story. And what is worse is that it didn't need to do a lot more to reach more of this potential, in my opinion. All it needed was just more impact. The game says you are the Emperor, you lead the country, you are in charge, but in the end it gives not enough for you to give that feeling you really are that Emperor. It's a bit of a shame that it turned out to be like that, but on the other hand, it's still cool that being the Emperor felt more present in the combat itself. If I would think old school turn-based JRPGs with a modern look, then Romancing Saga 2 would be exactly what I would be thinking of. It has loads of layers, side aspects, choices, and it strikes a difficulty middle ground of challenging but comfortably fun. The combat manages not to overstay its welcome, despite it being 95% of what you do in a playthrough. This is because of the Emperor swapping and the loads of options it gives in party constructions, skills, weapons, abilities, and so on. Adapting and changing is not just encouraged here, it's a must, and when you pull this off correctly again and again, it gives one of the greatest rewarding feelings games have to offer in terms of combat. And if that is everything you seek out of a JRPG experience, I would definitely recommend checking out this game. It has a demo, so there's no excuse for not giving it a shot. However, be warned, the beginning of the game is fairly slow. And if you are on the fence about the difficulty because you're not very experienced in a game like this, don't worry. If anything gets too rough on you, you can just easily switch to the easy mode and get past anything. However, be aware that it heavily affects the combat, and the combat carries this game as the story is not strong enough to do it on its own.